Welcome to Serpentes Sunday for October 15th, 2023. I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary, and you are in one of our intake areas. So this is an area where we can intake new animals. There are no other animals in this area, and if we get reptile intakes all on the same day or around the same few days, we initially will put them in here for initial quarantine. And I'm about to do that with two snakes who just arrived here on Saturday, October 14th. We also store things in here and use this as a work area. So we have extra enclosures stored in here. We have extra heaters stored in here. We have cleaning products stored in here and extra cage accessories stored in here. So I am going to give you a look at our initial intake enclosures, and I'll tell you why they're like this, but they don't stay in here long unless we find something wrong. So first, just let me start by telling you why they're like this. And would you like me to hold a snake while I do this? Because I'm really excited to show you these guys. So let me grab one of them and go ahead and put them in. And I'll talk about why we have this set up the way we do, about how long they might be expected to be in here before they move into a special projects room or a long-term quarantine room or an isolation room or one of our main areas. I wanted to talk to you a minute about how I get a new animal out and show you what that looks like. So if they arrive in a transport tub like this, I unlatch all of the sides and I'm going to open the lid towards me. That way, if the snake is skittish, if it's scared, if it flies out at me, I have a shield. And if it flies out in any other direction, it's not a problem because this room is safe. And then I will just give the snake a minute or two to look around, figure out where it's at. So when do I initially then put hands on the snake? And do I use a snake hook or my hands? It depends on how the snake's behaving. And this snake is behaving fairly calm. And I'm not really too worried about this snake because I handled it at the place where I picked it up. So the way that I first like to put hands on a snake that doesn't know me and I don't know them is not by coming at their face. Now this snake is coming towards me and that's just fine. If it wants to do that, that's perfect. I'll allow the snake to come to me. I'll allow the snake to tongue flick at me, to climb on me if it wants, and now he's retreating. He tongue flicked on my arm. That's fine. But I need to lift him out and put him into the intake enclosure. So I'm going to come around to this other side behind him and I'm going to wait until the snake is facing away from me. And I'm going to first touch around the middle as the snake's face is moving away from me. And I'm going to confidently but gently pick the snake up. And that went really well. So I will change the camera angle now so that you can see me putting him into his intake tank. Now, I said him, but I actually don't know what sex this snake is. This is a pair of Savu Pythons, Liasis savuensis. They're actually an endangered species. The IUCN has them listed as endangered. They occur only on one island in the Lesser Sunda Islands called Savu, and it's a very small island. I think it's about 150 square miles or less. This particular species, the females are usually larger than the males. So if I just go by which one's larger, this one is the larger of the two. And as you see, I'm just letting her go into the intake enclosure on her own. I'm letting her investigate it. I'm not stuffing her in there. She's free to kind of come in and out as she wants. And yes, it's nighttime. It's probably 1 or 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. These lights are not going to stay on all night. I turn all the lights on when I set up an intake cage because I want to make sure that they're all working before I find out tomorrow morning when I need all the lights to be on for them that they're not working. So the ambient temperature in this room is about 73 degrees. I have a ceramic heat emitter on each enclosure for at night. Sometimes I use a deep heat projector. And these snakes ultimately may not need nighttime heat, but for tonight, I have nighttime heat with no visible light set up. But then during the day, they will have a halogen, a UVB, and a full spectrum LED light. So now that she's gone into this enclosure, I'm gonna grab the camera and show you what the inside looks like. Our initial intake enclosures are 4x2x2, and this is a decent size for most of the snakes that we manage here, who are gonna be no larger than 8 feet long. No, we are not gonna permanently house an 8-foot snake or 7 or 6-foot snake in a 4x2x2 enclosure. I am talking about literally the initial intake enclosure. They arrive in a transport tub, and then we initially put them in an enclosure about this size until we assess them for a few days and figure out where they're going to go long term. But they will go into an appropriately sized enclosure long term. This may literally only be for a day or two or a few days. Now, if these enclosures end up being an appropriate size for these snakes, then they may become the snake's permanent enclosure, in which case we move the whole enclosure to a different area, or these guys just may stay in here until we get new intakes. These are EcoFlex by New Age Pet. They're a good economy enclosure. They have screen tops. So for initial intake, we've got a couple of hides and a water dish. It's pretty boring. And we've got paper towels. So what's the reason that we do an initial intake quarantine? Well, one, we want to see if the snake has mites, and that's easiest to see if there's not very much in the enclosure, if it's a light colored enclosure, if the water dish is light colored, and if they're on something light colored like paper towels. So we want to look for any signs of mites, bleeding, regurgitation, diarrhea, or any issues with urates. So when we know the snake doesn't have mites, when we know the snake is not regurging, when we know they're not having something wrong with their urates or stool, and all of the stuff sort of coming out of their body seems fine and we don't need to watch for that stuff anymore, then we'll give them substrate and we'll start giving them cardboard items for enrichment like paper towel rolls, toilet tissue rolls, cardboard boxes. We'll start to put more things in here that they can use for enrichment. But for the first 24 to 48 hours at least, this is how it's going to look so that it's glaringly obvious if there are any kind of bugs, mites, if the snake's producing any diarrhea, anything wrong with the urine, or bleeding from anywhere. Now, I was going to close this and noticed her tail's out. That's fine. They're very sensitive about their face being touched and their tail being touched. I just literally met this snake several hours ago, and there's no reason for me to touch her tail to get her to go inside. I'm standing right here. I'm watching her, and I'm going to put the other snake in this other enclosure so she can sit there for as long as I'm in here with her tail like that. And I'm hoping just within a few minutes that she'll bring the tail in on her own. Okay, this is the second one, and basically it's the same routine. I'm going to open the transport bin, and then I'm going to open the lid towards me slowly. I don't want to loom over the snake. Remember that snakes, all vertebrates, have looming sensitive cells in their brain. And so it makes them instinctually or innately fearful of things looming over them or dark expanding objects coming closer and closer to them. So I take the lid off. I'm going to set it aside. And I'm just going to let him slowly come out on his own. I'm going to observe his behavior. And I'm going to assess best how to manage him. I say him because I believe this is the smaller of the two, and in this particular species, the males are typically smaller. They have a vet appointment. It's a little bit less than a week from today, so on Friday, they'll be seeing our veterinarian, and they'll get a wellness check, and then we'll see what sex each is. I have very little information about them at this time. The information I do have is that they're long-term captives, that they are wild-caught animals that were imported about 6 years ago, and they've been under captive management since then. I'm told one's a male and one's a female, but the person who handed them over to us didn't know which was which. So again, I'm just going to let him explore and wait until he starts to come out of the tub on his own before I put hands on him and move him over to the intake enclosure. Now I've given him a few minutes and he isn't coming out of the travel tote. He seems more interested in hiding. He's trying to bury his head underneath the paper towels and behind the water dish. So I'm gonna, again, wait until his head is away from me. It's behind the water dish. I'm gonna touch him in the middle and I'm going to lift him on out. I'm doing this while his head is moving away from me, and I'm not restricting his movement. I'm allowing him to move. And I have a firm but gentle hold on him. So he should feel safe and secure in my hands and as I'm holding him, but he shouldn't feel restrained or restricted or like he can't move away if that's what he chooses to do. Okay, so I'm just going to take him over to his intake enclosure, which is set up in an identical fashion to the one that this snake is in. And I'm going to show him the entrance, and I'm going to let him choose to go in on his own. I'm going to support him with my hand because he's fairly comfortable. He seems comfortable with me holding him. And I am going to guide him inside. I don't want him to climb on the outside of it. So I'm going to keep him right around the door, but I'm not going to shove him inside and plop him down. I want this to be his choice. I mean, yes, I'm going to ultimately make sure he gets inside, but I'm not going to be in a hurry about this process. I don't want anything to scare these snakes, especially since this is their first experience here at our facility. And it's their initial interaction with an enclosure that they're going to be in for either a few days or longer, depending on what we decide over the next 24 to 48 hours. They may stay in here at least until the veterinary visit on the 20th. And so I am not going to be in a hurry doing this. This is not something that you're normally going to do in a hurry unless the snake is completely stressed and over threshold and you just need to get them in somewhere and leave them alone. These snakes aren't acting that way, and so I'm going to allow them to climb into the enclosures on their own. I'm going to not just drop my hands and take away all this support. I'm going to let him move in here as he chooses. And he's actually got a grip on my fingers. So I'm going to wait until his tail moves off on its own. And just like I did with her, I'm going to wait until he brings his tail in on its own before I shut the door or anything. I'll show you what the inside of this enclosure looks like, but it's literally identical to the first one. So I'll turn the visible lights off shortly. We don't leave any visible lights on for them at night. And now you can see that the one on the left that's already totally in the cage is the bigger one. So I'm just going to assume that's the female. We won't know for sure until our vet takes a look at them. And they were together when we picked them up, like literally together in the same container. But I was told they didn't live together, that they had just been transported together. Now, when I know more about these animals, I'll give you their history. I will tell you where they came from. It's not a secret, but I just want to make sure that I have all the information available before I tell you where I picked them up, where I found them, where they came from, etc. It was kind of chaotic, and I didn't get all of the information that I wanted to when I initially got them and brought them home. And I don't want him going up there near those heat lamps. So again, I'm going to encourage him gently to go into the enclosure. Now, understand, they've never been in these before. He doesn't realize this is his home or this is where he's supposed to stay tonight. He has no clue where he is. Neither one of them do. So it's normal for them to edge. That's investigate all of the edges of the enclosure It's normal for them to surf on the walls and the glass and to push their nose on things. They have no idea where they are. They have no idea what the boundaries are. So they're going to do a lot of moving around. They're going to do a lot of pushing and edging and glass surfing. And they're going to be quite active because they have no clue where they are. So they're going to look for a way out. And if they were in the wild, they'd be looking for a way back to their home range where they were hatched and where they were familiar with the environment. But they're not. And so their home range here is wherever they used to live before. And it's instinctual for them to want to leave where they find themselves now and go back to someplace familiar. But that's not possible. So we just have to let them go through this process where they're going to display elevated anxiety, where they are going to display more activity maybe than normal, a lot of edging and glass surfing and trying to get out because they don't know this is home. And once they settle in, once they feel safe and secure where they're at, once they scent mark the enclosure, once some of their familiar smells are in here and the area becomes familiar to them, then we should see reduced activity. We should see more resting and hiding at appropriate times, and for them to establish an activity routine that's more normal than what we're going to see right now during the first 24 to 48 hours. Lots of moving around is normal for many species at first because they're just so frantic to get out and get back to something familiar. They don't understand where they are. Other species may just find the first hiding place and hide and not come out for a while. It's just going to depend on the species and the individual snake on how they're going to behave when you first introduce them to a novel environment. So you see I have this enclosure set up the same, a couple of hides, a water dish, paper towels. I want to assess if this snake has mites. I want to assess if the snake is bleeding anywhere, if they're having any diarrhea, regurgitation, if their urates are normal. And once I know that all of those bodily functions are normal and I don't see any sign of ectoparasites or anything going on with them that would preclude them from having substrate, then I'll add substrate and cardboard boxes for enrichment. And then once they see the vet, and if they get a clean bill of health during their wellness exam, then I will give them even more things to do. Now he's going into a hide, that's fine. And he's moving slowly into that hide, which is on the cool end. So I may not end up, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the visible lights and leave, I may not leave actually the ceramic heat emitters on if they prefer it in the low 70s at night. That's what this room is anyway, so I don't need to leave any extra heat on. And I noticed that they both went to the cool side and we're spending time on the cool side. And now that these lights are out, she's moving around the whole enclosure now. So, and he's going in the cool side hide. I don't have the water dish all the way filled up. I just put minimal water in there. They're often stressed when they first arrive, so it's possible that they urinate and defecate tonight. And sometimes they'll do that in the water. So this will just make it easier for me to clean. There's not as much water wasted if I end up having to clean it tomorrow. And there's still plenty for them to drink. There's one thing that I did forget to mention when I was over there putting the snakes in the intake enclosures. And so you might be asking the question, well, aren't we watching for signs of disease? Yes, we're obviously going to notice if there's active clinical signs of a disease going on when we put them in the intake area or when they're in quarantine. However, if they have a bacterial infection, it may not be apparent for weeks or months. If they are carrying a virus but are asymptomatic, meaning they have no clinical signs, we might never know that they carry that virus. They may not become sick from that virus for years. And so that's why we take the snakes for an initial wellness exam with our veterinarian, where she is able to assess the snake's health by looking at the snake physically, by listening to the heart and the lungs, by taking a saliva culture for analysis, and by doing a virus screen. That way, if the snake is not actively sick and not showing any clinical signs of disease during the few days or the few weeks that we choose to keep them in quarantine, or the few months even, because literally if they're carrying some of these things but aren't sick from it, they can still infect other snakes even though they're not sick. We feel that it is better to watch for things we can see when they're in intake and quarantine, and have our vet do the proper diagnostic test to let us know if the snake has something that could cause disease or illness that they're carrying that we're not seeing symptoms of. I wanted to make that very, very clear that if you put your snake or other animal into quarantine for a few weeks, for 3 months, for 6 months, for a year, and think they are fine because they never got sick, they haven't been sick that whole time, they could still be carrying a virus that could infect other animals, and you might not ever know that. So I have a couple of shout outs before I wrap things up and turn all the lights out and leave them time to settle in. One is this cool hoodie, zip-up hoodie that I'm wearing, which is super soft. It's from Lauren Moody Studios, and I just got this yesterday. And she custom designs the logos that are on these things, and then she has them put on clothing. And you can find Lauren Moody Studios on Instagram. I am super happy with this. And it's not just snakes. There are geckos and other reptiles that she has on things, so just check that out. The other thing is this target. This was made by Danielle Anise, and you can find her snake training targets on Snake Training Targets page on Facebook. Now, obviously, you could use these training targets for some other animals. She can make them in any color and size that you want. This is the target I'm going to use for these two snakes. I am probably going to call them Mariner and Boimler, and this is going to be their target. This is a new target Danielle sent me. It's not been used by any other snakes. Has a retractable handle. It's a blue disc. Blue is a color that's perceptible by pythons and boas and corn snakes and most of the other snakes that we will have under captive management. They have the color options in their eyes to visualize blues and greens. They have dichromatic vision. They cannot see reds and colors in certain other wavelengths, but they can see blue and green. So this is going to be their target. So that's about it, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any questions for me, feel free to email me at behavioreducationllc@gmail.com or go to my website at behavioreducation.org. You can also find me obviously on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X, formerly known as Twitter, but I actually am never on there anymore. So mainly it's YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, and then my email and website. So until next time, everybody, please remember to always be kind and love your animals.